Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. Great to have you with me here every single week. And today, in this episode, I have with me my guest who was with me in a previous episode. In this episode, we're asking, what is the struggle over Jerusalem all about? If you do watch the news, one thing that the mainstream media does talk about all the time, it seems, when they do talk about the Middle East, is this Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has been going on. And also, the Jerusalem. I mean, we look at Jerusalem, we look at the temple, we see how the Western Wall, or some people call it the Wailing Wall, is where the Jews will go and pray. And the Muslims control the Temple Mount. That is where the Dome of the Rock is. That is where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is as well. And we see this struggle over Jerusalem in general, but also the Temple Mount in particular. Here with me once again is Dr. Mordecai Kedar. He is a researcher and lecturer at Bar Ilan University in Israel. Dr. Kedar, thank you so much for giving us some of your time this morning.
It's my pleasure and my honor to be here.
We are asking what this struggle over Jerusalem is all about. Why is there a struggle between Israel and its neighbors over Jerusalem?
Well, from Israel's side, means the Jewish side, Jerusalem is our capital for more than 3,000 years. We had the two temples, the first temple, which was built by King Solomon, and the second temple was built by the Jewish people who came back from the exile in Babylon in the 6th century BCE. The second temple was destroyed in the 1st century CE in the year of 70 by Titus. And ever since then, we are in exile and we pray towards Jerusalem. We commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem day and night in every occasion. Jerusalem is our direction of prayer, of course. And Jerusalem is actually the other side of the word Judaism. Judaism without Jerusalem is like cat without whiskers. So this is Jerusalem and Judaism are very, very much intertwined, and this is what Judaism is. And this why we never had any other capital, we never had any other desire to any other country, to any other state, or to any other city. Jerusalem is our, and definitely one of the names of Jerusalem is Zion, and the word Zionism, which created the modern state of Israel, definitely is based on this word Zion, which is the acronym for Jerusalem, and this is why actually Jerusalem is the center of our being here in this country, and this is why we Jews want to stay in Jerusalem forever. The problem is with the other side, with the Palestinians, and around them the Arabs, and around them the Muslims. And these are the three circles. The Palestinians claim that Jerusalem belongs to them, and it should be their capital, although Jerusalem was never, not even one day in history, a capital of any Arab or Islamic country. Not even one day in its history, a king or a caliph or a sultan or emir took Jerusalem as his capital. So historically, there is no reason why the Palestinians should have a state. By the way, they never have a state. So definitely Jerusalem was never any capital for the Palestinians. So why should Jerusalem particularly will be their capital? Why do they demand Jerusalem? To a degree that they keep claiming that without Jerusalem is their capital, they will not declare statehood. To that degree. Why? When was Jerusalem a capital of any Arab or Islamic, let alone Palestinian, which never was? So this is one thing. Historically, their claim to Jerusalem is totally baseless. Also from the politics point of view, Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, keeps telling us today to establish a Palestinian state in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria with Jerusalem as its, or East Jerusalem as its capital. And I keep asking our Jordanian friends and neighbors, you Jordanians, you Jordan, you occupy the West Bank and East Jerusalem for 19 years. between 1948 and 1967. 19 years. Why didn't you establish a Palestinian state in the West Bank, which was under your occupation, and East Jerusalem is its capital? They never answer. But, or the Arab League, or even Europe, and some people in America, they never demanded Jordan to establish a Palestinian state and Jerusalem as its capital. But today they demand that Israel does it. Why? What happened? What's the difference? So it is also, this demand is weird. But people kept telling us that Jerusalem is the third place in holiness for Islam after Mecca and Medina, and this is why it should be under Islamic hands. Well, even this saying has some problems. First of all, Jerusalem is not considered to be holy to the Shi'i Islam. The Shia have a different place, which is a third place in holiness after Mecca or Medina, and that place is Najaf, a town in southern Iraq. This is the third place in holiness for the Shia, not for the Sunnah. Not for the Sunnah, only for the Shia. And Shia are not three people. Shia are one of six of Islam. Means like 250 million people. 250 million of people, Muslims, traditionally do not think that Jerusalem is holier than any other city. So already then even within the Sunnah, there is debate about Jerusalem. For this, you have to understand how Jerusalem became holy for Muslims. The process was rather long.
According to tradition, Muhammad was born in 570, and in 622, that is when he fled from Mecca to Medina. He was born in Mecca, but because he heard of assassination plot on his life, he fled to Medina, or which was the Hijra. That was the original Islamic migration. Now we are seeing a modern day Hijra today of people coming to the West, but of course, Mecca and Medina are seen as the first and second most holy places in Islam. The third, as you said, is Israel. Now, how did Israel become the most holy place for, again, Sunni Muslims in particular? About 90% of Muslims in the world are Sunni. Why do they see that as the third most holiest place, again, after Mecca and Medina?
For this, you have to understand how it developed to be holy. First of all, Prophet Muhammad, according to the Hadith, the oral tradition, he directed the prayer of the Muslims to Jerusalem for like a year and a half, when he was trying to convince the Jews of Medina to convert to Islam. Because if he said to them, I pray to Jerusalem, you pray to Jerusalem, let's unite, come to me and be under my aegis, and we'll join Islam because we also pray to Jerusalem. They didn't buy this thing because they had the original religion, while Islam, as you might know, is a replica of Judaism and Christianity as well. If you read the Quran, you see how much Jewish material is embedded in the Quran. So they didn't want to convert to Islam, so he slaughtered them all. But after he killed them all, there was no any more reason why to pray to Jerusalem. So he sanctified Mecca in the year of 630, occupied it, and turned his back to Jerusalem and forgot about this. Yet, in the year of 682, 50 years after he died, there was a rebellion in Mecca when the capital was already in Damascus under the Umayyads, the Umayyad dynasty, and the people in Mecca did not allow their cousins from Damascus to come to Hajj. For 10 years, between 682 and 691. So they looked for a different alternative place for pilgrimage instead of Mecca, because the Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and every year you have to go to Hajj, but Mecca was closed. So the people in Damascus who controlled Jerusalem decided to divert the Hajj from Mecca to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was under their hand, and after all, Jerusalem was holy for Jews, was holy for Muslims, for Christians. So, but Jerusalem, the problem was that Jerusalem does not appear in the Quran, not even once. But what there is in the Quran is the mention of a mosque named Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa means the further. According to Islamic sources, the original Al-Aqsa was near a town or a village named Ju'rana, between Mecca and Taif, in the Arab Peninsula. And this is what the Quran means by talking about Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is near Ju'rana, between Mecca and Taif. But 50 years later, when the rebellion in Mecca erupted, they looked for a way how to justify the choosing of Jerusalem as an alternative place for Hajj. So they claimed that the Al-Aqsa, which is mentioned in the Quran, is actually in Jerusalem. How do you say? Fake news. This is the fake news of the 7th century. So the whole concept that Al-Aqsa is in Jerusalem was made 50 years after Muhammad died in order to convince the people from Damascus area to go to pilgrimage, to Hajj, to Jerusalem instead of Mecca, although Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, but by interpreting that verse in chapter 17, of which talks about Al-Aqsa, a new interpretation which puts it in Jerusalem, places it in Jerusalem. So this is how we got stuck with Jerusalem, the Jewish capital, as a holy place for Muslims, as a kind of fake news from the 7th century. The Shia didn't buy it because the Shia were the enemies of the Umayyads. This is why they don't believe that Jerusalem is a holy place traditionally. Only after Khomeini's revolution in 1979, they started to talk about Jerusalem. But traditionally, the Shia have nothing with Jerusalem. And also, there are at least 2 scholars from the Sunni part of Islam, one named Razali and another guy is Ibn Taymiyyah. They both knew the origin of the sanctity of Jerusalem. And for them, they didn't consider Jerusalem as a holy place, more than Beirut, Damascus, Alexandria, or Cairo. So this is, in short, how Jerusalem became holy for Muslims as a fake news of the 7th century. And all the hadiths which sanctify Jerusalem, or I would say elevate the status of Jerusalem above the status of Mecca, were concocted in the 7th century in order to convince the people to come to Hajj, to Jerusalem, and instead of Mecca. And this is actually what we are stuck until this very day, with all kinds of fairy tales about Muhammad who is flying on a horse, with wings, something which reminds us of the story of Pegasus. Pegasus, from the Greek mythology, which, again, a man who rides all kinds of animals with wings. But we have to carry in mind another thing. According to the Islamic creed, Islam is din haq, means religion of truth, while both Judaism and Christianity are din batil, means religion of falsehood, because both religions, Judaism and Christianity, were cancelled by Moses and Jesus Christ after they prayed behind Muhammad, means they recognized his leadership in the heaven when he came from Jerusalem, part of the sanctity of Jerusalem, to heaven, to the 7th heaven. This is a very, very important story because this actually situated Islam as a substitute or replacement of both Judaism and Christianity. And therefore, since Islam came to the world, only Islam is the true religion, din al-haq, while Judaism and Christianity are null and void. And Jews and Christians should live under the Islamic rule as dhimmis, means people with very low rights. A Jew and a Christian cannot ride a horse, only a donkey, in order to humiliate him. a Jew and a Christian cannot walk on the sidewalk, but they have to walk in the sewage canal if there is not enough space for Muslims and Christians and Jews on the sidewalk. And sewage canal in the Middle Ages were not only something which came from the kitchens, it came from other parts of the house as well. So this is where Jews and Christians should walk, while Muslims are walking on the dry and clean sidewalk. This is the rules of the Dima. There are many more rules, which are all meant to denigrate the Jew and to humiliate the Christian. And actually there is a verse in the Quran which says that Jews and Christians should pay the jizya, means the skull tax,
poll tax,
when they are while they are humiliated. Wahum sariyun. Okay? So, and of course, Jews and Christians have no right to a state, have no right to an army, statehood, sovereignty. They should live under the auspice of Islam. And here come the Jews, and with the Christians from Europe and America, who helped them to occupy this Islamic land as they believe, and they establish a state. Since when does a Jew have a right to a state? This is something which Islamically, which is religiously, Muslims cannot accept, that a Jew has a state in 1948. Then in 1967, Jews, with the help of the Americans, of course, and the other Christians, like a conspiracy of Jews and Christians against Islam, they occupy Jerusalem, and Jews now want to go into the Temple Mount in order to pray there. And this actually, everything which the establishing of the state, the occupation, as they call, of Jerusalem, and activity of Jews on the Temple Mount, in their view, is a revivalism of Judaism, like resurrection of Judaism, which came from the ashes came from being cancelled by Islam, comes back to life, and it becomes a religion of truth, because we have a state, we have an army, we have a police, we have a government, and that's why Judaism comes back to life. This is something which Muslims cannot accept religiously, because according to their view, Judaism is null and void. How can Jews be sovereign to any country in the world, let alone this country, Jerusalem as well? So today, they feel it as a threat that Israel poses on the mere existence of Islam, or the mere validity of Islam. And here comes the Christian Trump, and he recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of the Jews. This is another conspiracy of the Christians and the Jews against Islam. Now, the Palestinians know it very well. And this is why they know that if they have a state without Jerusalem, they will be viewed as traitors who betrayed Islam. And the whole Islamic world will abandon them, will boycott them, will see them as people who collaborate with the Jews and Christians and allowed Judaism to come back to life. This is why they declare time and again that they will not have a state if Jerusalem is not its capital, because they will not be able to show their faces in front of their brethren, Muslims and Arabs. This is why they insist on having Jerusalem, to a degree that they actually produce this scarf, as you can see in demonstrations. And this is by the PLO, not by Hamas even. And here it says, Al-Quds Lana, means Jerusalem is ours. And this is the Dome of the Rock, as if it's, since when it's theirs? It was never theirs. But on the other side, they have this, Palestine. And the map is the whole country. So where is Israel? There is no Israel. And they know the connection. If they have Jerusalem, means the Jewish heart, they will have the whole country. And this is what happens. And this is why they insist of having Jerusalem, and in order to have the whole country, and Israel will evaporate, and we Jews will go back to the places which we came from, as they think that we should do. And this is why they insist on Jerusalem, because they know that Jerusalem is not yet recognized by the world at large as Israel's capital. Okay, the United States did a very good thing by recognizing Jerusalem as our capital and some other countries like Guatemala. But the majority of the states of the world, although they recognize the right of Israel to exist, they don't recognize the right of Israel to Jerusalem. And this is why the Palestinians and the Arabs around them and the Muslims around them keep hammering on this issue of Jerusalem, because they know that Jerusalem is a weak link in Israel. They never talk about Tel Aviv, they never talk about Haifa or other cities, only in Jerusalem, because they know that if they succeed to extract the Jerusalem from the Jews, Jews will lose hope and will go back to America, to Morocco, to Yemen, to wherever they came from, to this country, and this will be the end of Israel. This is why they show how if they have Jerusalem, they will have the whole land. And they actually expose exactly what they think and what they plan. And this is why, in my humble view, if any country in the world wants to support the existence of the state of Israel, these countries in the world should recognize the right of Israel to Jerusalem. Because when our neighbors will understand that Israel is here forever by the consent of the whole world, which recognizes Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, then peace will come. Because in the Middle East, peace is given only to a country which is viewed as invincible. Not a country which seeks peace, not a country which begs for peace. Anyone who begs for peace is viewed as weak and somebody who will get a kick, you know exactly where, and will be chased out. Only a strong country, only a country which is viewed as invincible can achieve peace in the Middle East. By recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, this is a great contribution to peace, which Israel can enjoy with the Arabs. And this is why I highly encourage, from this esteemed pulpit which you give me here, I highly encourage all the politicians, the whole world, to recognize the Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem and to recognize Jerusalem as our capital. After all, Jerusalem is the oldest capital in the whole world, more than 3,000 years. Since King David moved its capital from Hebron to Jerusalem, and since his son, of course, built the temple in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is the oldest capital in the whole world, way before Washington, D.C. was declared as the American capital, way before London in Britain, and way before Paris in France, and way before any other capital in the world was declared as the capital. Jerusalem was the capital of the Jews. This is why it's a shame that the world has not yet recognized Jerusalem as our capital, which is mainly because people are afraid of the Arabs, afraid of the Arab money, afraid of terror, which is incited by Arabs and Muslims, and afraid of the Iranians, who also are against the whole thing. And this is how the world is actually directed by Arabs, at least in this question of Jerusalem. I highly encourage everyone to call his congressman and his senator and to urge them to promote the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel as a contribution to peace.
Dr. Kedar, a couple of the historical problems that people are not aware of, which is basically part of the fake revisionist supposed history of Islam, is that Islam was the original religion of the world. That became corrupted and became Judaism. That got corrupted and became Christianity. And when the Quran was supposedly sent down to Muhammad, that was getting people back to the original religion of Islam. So if they claim that Adam was a Muslim, that Abraham was a Muslim, that Moses was a Muslim, that's why they tried to claim that Jerusalem was theirs originally, and that was taken over by non-Muslims, so they were just taking it back. When we actually look at real history, we see that Jerusalem belonged to the Israelites, and it was the Muslims who came along and took that. And of course, that takes us into the Crusades and all of that. Now, another problem with history, or history according to Islam, is when we're talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about the Temple Mount. People can read in chapter 17 of the Quran, verse 1, it talks about a supposed journey that Muhammad took from Mecca on the back of a winged donkey named Barak, of all names you could have there. And he flew from Mecca to the furthest, most northern mosque, which is supposedly the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits on top of the Temple Mount. Now, of course, what is the problem here? How can we know that this story is false? But also, of course, it just adds to the Quran being a lie. The problem here is that Muhammad, again, was born in 570. He died in 632. The night journey took place around 621, 622, supposedly. This is AD, just before Muhammad migrated to Medina. Now, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was not built until 712. Nor did the Dome of the Rock exist in Muhammad's time. It was built in 691 by the Caliph Abdul Malik. So we have claims about history which do not line up with actual history and archaeological findings that we have. So many claims of history by Islam are false. They're revisionist. And this is the material that they use to try to claim that it's been theirs when it never has been, unless when they took it over during the Crusade times. This is the problem here, is that people do not study history. Many people in the West don't study the history of Islam. They don't study the primary sources, the Quran, the Hadith, the Sirah, the Taqi, the Al-Tabari. He talks about the supposed night journey. Again, history of the world according to Islam is revisionist. It is false, and people need to know that. But they also need to know how this struggle over Jerusalem can be solved. Dr. Kedar, we have about 30 seconds left. Please take that 30 seconds to explain how this problem can be solved.
Well, the problem can be solved when people will start telling them that they should start checking their own sources. Because by recycling the lies and the false allegations and the fake news which they created in the 7th century, actually puts them back into the 7th century. They should really revise their history and their stories in order to come to the conclusion which Western societies have reached way in the past.
Excellent. Dr. Kedar, it's been a blessing to have you here on a couple of episodes of Colliding Worldviews. Again, I want to point people to your website, or at least a website that they should check out, PalestinianEmirates.com. Also, they can look you up, Dr. Mordecai Kedar, online and find more of your articles that you write. Of course, you do many interviews with many different news outlets, and that's why we thank you so much for your time today and being here on a couple episodes of Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Friends, take this episode, both episodes with Dr. Kedar, and share them with other people. People need to be educated about Islamic history, true Islamic history, not the false claims that they make about it. We have all the evidence in the world to prove that Islam is a lie. It is a religio-political system, a religion and a political ideology combined. And it's based on a lie. It's based on falsities. It is not true. Their view of God or Allah is false. Their view of Jesus is false. Their view of history is false. Their view of the prophets, Abraham, Moses, etc., are false. The ultimate solution here is the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. We just need to care about people enough to share the gospel with them. And of course, if we care about all people, that means that we are going to care about Muslims. They are people made in the image of God who just need to know the truth. They're very devout people. They're very sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. Why? Because their devotion is pointed to a lie. But when a Muslim hears the truth, they understand who God is, who Jesus is, that the repentance and faith in Christ, that can be reconciled to him. That devotion is transferred from a lie to the truth. And that is why ex-Muslims make great Christians, because they are now devoted to the truth rather than the lie. Get the truth out to all Muslims, and we'll see you next time on Colliding Worldviews.